One of them may already be insane. For that matter, one of them may actually be a sea god. I mean, there's so much strangeness.
Yeah. Hello, welcome to November edition of Talking Pictures. I'm Mary Stack.
I'm Michael Dow.
And we're going to share with you some of the things we've been watching over the past several weeks. In fact, we've got 6 movies for you today.
There's a lot on the plate this week.
Got Harriet.
Parasite.
Motherless Brooklyn.
Ford versus Ferrari.
The Good Liar.
And The Lighthouse.
How's about that? So let's start with Harriet, which looks at the history making of the abolitionist icon Harriet Tubman, and it's directed by Cassie Lemons, a young director. It's a great cast, headed by Cynthia Erivo, who is also unknown to me, but she's destined for great things. And she plays this part very dynamically. It's a very strong woman. In fact, she's so strong that she seems possessed. And in this particular portrayal, they actually have her hearing the voice of God, the same way that Joan of Arc used to. And she falls down periodically to the ground in these trances.
Or like breaking the waves.
Yeah.
Sorry. Different movie.
Anyway, she starts off being called Minty. That's her name. And then she runs away from her slave owner in Maryland to Safe Haven in Philadelphia. Literally runs, armed with nothing except the clothes she stands in. And once she gets to Philadelphia, she changes her name to Harriet once she's a free woman. But she actually established herself as a person called Moses, who's often seen as a man that takes multiple trips at night across to the plantations to free slaves and take them back to freedom. So this Underground Railroad, I think she has something like 40 different trips that she takes. And the film culminates in this terrible sort of showdown between her and the cruel former owner. And then the ending scene is her actually leading the Union Army, again to free slaves during the Civil War, which I didn't even know anything about that history. So there's a sort of level of very raw brutality to the film, enacted against women, men, and children, and callous indifference at the same time, which is very hard to watch, but I found it to be a necessary education. So I think this is a great film. I don't know what people were critical of it for. It's harrowing, but it's incredibly illuminating about a whole genre of people's conditions. And anyway, I think she'll probably get an award for her performance.
Is there anything they do with the movie to kind of make it appealing to a contemporary audience, you know? Like any sensationalism or, you know, kind of...
She is very much sensationalized. I mean, her costumes get more and more interesting as the movie progresses, and she's brandishing, you know, this gun which she manages to carry secreted about herself in these multiple layers of dress. Yeah, I think she becomes quite, I mean, I'm going to say a fashion icon, but the person who did the costumes really
they look
knew
like they
how
kind
to...
of Bonnie and Clyde her up almost, which is...
a bit like a highway woman.
Yeah.
So I don't know how much of that is authentic, but certainly she starts off with this single dress and runs through rivers in it, and she is incredibly fit as a runner, this woman. She runs miles in these long, flowing wet dresses through fields and rivers. But anyway, I don't know about the falling down into fits. I don't know if that was true. I'm pretty sure it must have been for them to have documented it. Anyway, worth seeing. Okay, Parasite, Michael.
Parasite, yeah, there we go. I suppose another film dealing with class in some respects. So first of all, Parasite is this sensation, I guess, of the year. It's like technically, maybe next to The Joker, it's the most successful film of the year. I mean, it won the Palme d'Or first of all. And given that it's a South Korean film by Bong Joon-ho, a name nobody in America, I'm sure, has heard of or cared to hear of until this film broke through. And it's first of all just incredibly refreshing to see a South Korean film break through and make a statement and have an impact.
So it's subtitled?
It's rapidly subtitled. Maybe a couple of warnings. You know, the subtitling is a bit much to keep up with. Maybe it's just because of our slow brains in the Western world. I don't know. But yeah, so as far as the film being a phenomenon in and of itself is commendable, but the film on its own is really quite wonderful. I'd categorize it, if I had to give it a kind of genre label, it's somewhat of a home invasion movie, where this extremely lower class family of grifters, they seem to enjoy their lifestyle in some respects of being these grifters. They insinuate themselves into this mega wealthy family. They basically become employees one by one of this wealthy family. They take on fake identities, and they pull it off remarkably well for the longest time. So it's a kind of home invasion movie in that this family kind of takes over and, like parasites, begin to assimilate themselves into the lifestyle of the wealthy family. The wealthy family goes on a camping trip and they effectively take on the identities of the family with, as you can imagine.
And it's believable?
Well, this is the thing. Yeah, you're watching it and you're like, this is preposterous. This is preposterous. But the film is so slick in a good way, and it moves along with such a flow that you kind of, I'm one of those people, I'll allow those kinds of seemingly like incredulous inconsistencies. I'll kind of let them go by. That stuff doesn't bother me too much. I'm not a slave to kind of reality logic in movies. If I'm really kind of enjoying, you know, what characters are taking me through and the degree to which I can kind of identify with characters, I'll let a lot go, so to speak. So the film itself is very much a class-conscious movie. It's kind of, you know, Downton Abbey, upstairs, downstairs business going on, where you have kind of constantly shifting moral allegiances. You know, you feel sympathy for the lower class family, then the upper class family, and it's one of those movies where again, I hate to say this in such a blanket way about all foreign films, but it deals with a kind of moral complexity and a moral ambiguity that you just, even to this day, you rarely find, certainly in mainstream American cinema. So that's something that the film is all about going for it.
I've got to ask you a quick question.
Yeah.
The values, obviously the value system there, does that translate?
Well, the funny thing is, part of what you were asking me before is like, is this believable? One of the things that the film has to tackle, and it does it pretty ingeniously, is when you watch it, it feels like a very modern movie. Okay, so even though these are South Korean families, you can see the extent to which they have become effectively westernized or Americanized. And they want a lifestyle that is very kind of imitative of the kind of Western capitalist ideal. So you've got a lot of that going on in the film. But the film itself is a kind of slow burn. You find yourself identifying with these characters in, as I say, kind of slippery moralistic ways. And by the time it gets to the end of the movie, and the film makes its grand statement, it is such a release. You have this moment where there's, without giving much away, there's this insane eruption of violence. And you're just like, wow. And you find yourself, it's like you're worn down so much by the film after 2 hours, it's like you don't know how to react to it. I found myself laughing, and I'm like, it's inappropriate to laugh, but I'm like, I've been so like worn down by the dramatics going on that I'm like, all I can do is laugh at this point, you know? And again, you find yourself kind of questioning your own kind of moral judgment of characters and character motivations. It's a fascinating study that kind of puts you in a situation where you think you understand, you know, human nature, you think you believe in civilization, but characters are kind of worn down to such a primal state by the end.
They're all the same. Like, they're all the same. We're motivated by the same.
Yeah, this is what we really are. You know, this is how we really are towards each other. Man's inhumanity to man, that kind of grand stuff. So, yeah, as I say, it's just a very interesting study. And never mind the family politics the film deals with, that's a whole other layer. I would almost guarantee, I know South Korea is putting it up for the Best Picture nomination. I can't imagine this wouldn't win.
Well, quite a relief from all that. As a little gem that I went to and was way surprised, and it's become sort of my favourite film at the moment, Motherless Brooklyn. So apparently this film was like 20 years in the making. Ed Norton stumbled on this book.
Passion project, right?
Yeah, and then he couldn't find anyone to write the screenplay, so in the end he wrote it himself. So Ed Norton writes the screenplay, he directs it, and he's the lead. So it's about this gumshoe private eye who's got Tourette syndrome. And you'd think, ugh, that doesn't sound very plausible. I know, but it works. It really works. It works really well. So Jonathan Lethem wrote the novel, and Ed Norton takes it back 40 years, till 1950s. But it doesn't fall into that sort of Philip Marlowe cliche thing. Somehow, even though it's got this massive star-studded cast, it keeps this sort of little indie feel to it. It's an intimacy that's wonderful about it. So it's refreshing, but also real, moving. So Norton plays Lionel Esro, who's this pretty kind of a loner loser. I mean, first he's got all this problem with no filters and saying all the wrong things. And you think, well, this is a very unlikely person to be a private eye, really. But he's got a steel-trap mind, which he demonstrates. He remembers everything, and he's very logical. So he can work things out other people miss. Anyway, here, the whole kind of crux of the plot is he's looking for the person that murdered his boss, Frank Minner, who's played briefly, but quite brilliantly, by Bruce Willis. And the two of them met in the orphanage.
Still, briefly is good.
Well, yeah, I agree, but he's good. He's good in the role. So he's somehow involved with, you can't tell if it's the mob, but there's a very weird scene that goes badly. And anyway, Frank gets knocked off. And so he sets out to try and kind of avenge this. Because he was his friend in the orphanage, and he's never and nobody's ever been a friend to him. So there's a lot riding on this other than just solving a murder. So despite the big problems he has, he's got a lot of determination. So the nice thing about it is it's set in the sort of jazz clubs and the seamy parts of Brooklyn and Harlem. So there's a really cosmopolitan feel to it, which is really refreshing. You don't normally get that in the 1950 kind of classic, film noir about, the soft shoe. Right. Anyway, so he uncovers a lot of secrets and corruption in trying to delve into this, and nearly gets murdered a few times. That's the only part that's a little hard to understand why he isn't. He's definitely beaten up several times, and each time you see him, he's got different kind of bits and pieces on his face where he's been beaten up, and he looks very like Robert Mitchum at one point.
Yeah, well,
there was this part that I just went, whoa, that looks like Robert Mitchum. Anyway, on the way to trying to uncover the truth.
Like Robert Mitchum practically invented that character.
Yes. But there's a look.
Yeah.
There's a look about it, and that's the only sort of mimicry I could see.
Okay.
I didn't even think it was contrived. I just felt it. So on the way, he crosses path, I should say, with William Dafoe, who's this kind of crazed inventor, and his brother, who is the most dangerous man in the city. And he's this kind of Robert Moses city planner type. And he's played by Alec Baldwin very well. So I was both spellbound and also on the edge of my seat. That's kind of hard to do.
Sounds like there's a lot of plot business. Is it
there
tangled?
is.
Okay.
And there's a lovely romantic ending, which I'm not going to... So prepare to be dazzled. It's way more than I expected, and it didn't seem long. A lot of people said, oh, it's long. It wasn't long at all.
It's got
brilliant.
a little lost in the shuffle, that movie.
Yeah, lost in the old shoe shuffle, yes. How
right, exactly.
Aptly put, Michael. Lost in the shuffle, yeah. Okay, take it away with Ford and Ferrari.
Oh, Ford versus Ferrari, yeah. I got to say, as much as I enjoyed it, and it's a piece of entertainment, I was surprisingly disappointed by it.
It's long, isn't it?
Yeah, it's 2 hours and 40 minutes, first of all.
Wow.
And, well...
That's a lot of cars. That's a lot of tires.
Right. There's something, not to kind of give a call forward or something to The Lighthouse, but because there's a certain similarity. What the film has going for it in terms of its running length, and I'll get to the plot, I promise, but it takes you through process. And it's very much a film for car aficionados, gearheads, because you can tell the film goes out of its way in terms of its research of the minutiae of
engines,
car mechanics, stuff I don't care about, but it's it's fascinating. And again, like I'm saying, it's like you can watch this film and I trust it. I trust that they're really getting their facts right, or at least attempting or doing their best to. So that is like one of the reasons I think to justify the running time is because, as I say, it takes you through so much of the lives of these various characters in the film. So what's it about?
So isn't it got a big cast?
Yeah, a fairly large cast. Yeah, I mean, it's the two main players who matter the most. Again, a kind of alter ego scenario between the two male leads. But basically, it's set in 1966, and it's all about the Ford Corporation having a crisis because Ferrari has built the faster car, and Ford needs to keep up and to contemporize. In order to do that, they go out of their way to try to develop a car that can effectively beat the Ferrari at, especially at the 24-hour Le Mans.
Le Mans,
Yeah, so the film takes you through Daytona, it takes you through Le Mans. Le Mans is the denouement of the movie, which, the last like 40 minutes of the film is dedicated to those two races. And that's, in some ways, the most fun you get out of the movie. It's like finally you get, the racing and, what happens to the characters in relation to the need to win and whatever. So basically, it's about one man, Carroll Shelby, played by Matt Damon, who is a car designer who has health issues and has to give up racing. So he kind of retreats into the background, becomes a car designer, works for Ford, and basically insists on hiring this character named Ken Miles. I mean, these are real people, it's based on reality, obviously, but he insists that Ford hire this kind of hotshot racer, Ken Miles, who's also a mechanic, who can effectively help in the design of the car, but especially to race the car and effectively win Le Mans. Okay, so that's the plot.
Did that happen?
Yeah, it definitely happened. And, that's really where Ford, in the 60s, Lee Iacocca is a major character in the film, and this is where Ford reinvents itself. I mean, as little as I know about car culture, I tend to think about Ford and the Mustang is almost synonymous with 60s car culture. And the film kind of plays a lot of that up. So I hate to use such a tired, like, cliche, but the film it's like a shiny car without much of an engine. I mean, the film, as far as the structure, the dramatics, it plays it very safe. It has this very nostalgic glow to it, which I found off-putting. There are certain scenes that ring very false, especially there's a lot of family dynamics with the Miles character and his wife and his son. I don't know who plays the son, Peter, but he's fantastic. But it's so sentimental. I mean, do you ever watch a movie and you're like, the emotions just aren't ringing true here? Am I the
a lot?
Yeah,
a lot.
But this one really, it just feels as though it's playing at something. It's playing at the emotion.
Does it become patriotic in any way?
Yes, well, again, and I don't think I've ranted about this just yet, but it's what I often refer to as the Spielberg syndrome. It's these kind of shallow attempts at kind of maudlin sentimentality. There are moments where, the film is as much about... The film is as much about Miles's bonding with his son and his wife's observance of the bonding between father and son as it is about racing. It's one of those things. I'm like, you could basically cut an hour out of this movie, cut all the sentimental garbage out, and just give me the action, That's really more of what I was expecting from the film than what I actually got.
So they thought that was for women?
Exactly. Well, it feels like a focused, like so many American films, it feels like a focus tested film. It's like we need the element where women can relate. Yeah, and you get the requisite sexism, and of course all of that is there. And the film also, you see a lot of the kind of inner workings of the corporate aspect at Ford, and they play it out like, kind of subpar Mad Men scenes. It's not that the subject matter isn't interesting, it's just, you've seen it all before, So
what do we learn about Ferrari? Do we get into the inner...
Yeah, the Italians too come off as completely one note. There are a lot of scenes where you see Miles's character racing against the Italian drivers, and there's one particular driver racing the Ferrari, and all you see is like the Italian's like smug face. It's like, I'm gonna get you. It's so cheesy, it's like, and they've given absolutely no depth whatsoever. It's
sounds like Thunderbirds.
Very one note.
Remember the old Thunderbirds?
Yeah, and can I also, I just want to complain about one other thing. Matt Damon, I don't know how this guy got to be where he is. It's like, there are scenes where, yeah, exactly, you just watch, if anyone watches this movie, watch how he chews gum. It is so annoying. And it's like he thinks and he's supposed to, I'll just say, there's one big emotional moment in the film where he's supposed to be crying. But instead he's like breathing through his mouth. And I'm like, and then he wipes away a tear that isn't there. It's you see that a million times in movies, but it's like that moment was like, oh God, how many times do I have to see an actor fake cry and think they're convincing the camera?
He couldn't cry and chew gum.
Exactly. Yeah, there's a moment where it's like, okay, I can't really cry, so I'm going to breathe heavy through my mouth and hope like the audience doesn't notice, even though the camera's right on me. It's one of those moments.
Dear.
So yeah, I mean, as I say, there's a lot to recommend about it, but Christian Bale just eats Matt Damon's lunch as an actor. I mean, the balance is just so apparently unequal. And the film, likewise, even the racing scenes, which were enjoyable, but again, it's one of those situations, I hate to sound like a broken record, but there's so much CGI that I feel like they're not really racing. That's not, that's a computer car. They're not really racing. Oh, that accident. It's all just, it's all like, it's all in the processing,
Okay, well, very short and sweet bite.
Oh, right.
A nutty little fruitcake is The Good Liar, which is playing. And
wasn't that the working title, A Nutty Little Fruitcake?
and just worth going for the performances alone. Helen Mirren and Ian McKellen. I mean, I just love those two. And there's a chemistry that's totally believable. It feels like a play. There's a lot of interior stuff going on between them. And that's the dynamic that works about it. The plot, there's kind of a cat and mouse dredging up people's lives and history under the guise of internet dating. So it's actually a very clever sideswipe at the whole phony, huge business of playing on people's insecurities and unspoken needs, which is what the internet and dating,
social media,
is all about. And yet it takes on a very sinister kind of, and I won't tell you. It plays out very well. It's compelling.
You tell them.
There's deceit and revenge.
Intrigue.
Yeah. And just when you think, oh, she'd never fall for that, it's really good because it does this thing of you keep second guessing if they are in the know about each other, which is hard to do right up to the very last 5 minutes of the film. It's clever. It's well done.
And just what you mentioned briefly, I think it needs to be given more attention because, again, what I'm starting to do now is going back to watching Parasite. I'm like, they're really incorporating aspects of technology and social media, as I say, remarkably modern film. I don't know if The Good Liar, but just you mentioning that, they're kind of through internet dating, the plot begins to develop. It seems to be, I don't want to say it's a crisis, but it's a consideration, I think, now. It's like, how do movies do what they do given where we are now in this day and age of social media and technology? It's like, how do you incorporate that and make it believable and still sustain, a narrative and keep people involved? It's a general question, but as I say, so few films really do that, even really go there and really like try to work, okay, how do we weave in the current moment, aspects of everyday life in contemporary times into the narrative.
It was done very well in that. That was exactly what it did do. And it also recreated historically well revisits to Berlin during the war and such, so which were well done.
Interesting.
But only enough of it, it wasn't over the top. It was grounded very much in the plot, was plot driven, and the characters. Characters were you can't take your eyes off either of them on stage.
No.
And this was like a play. Ian McKellen, he's just a master.
Yeah.
And flip of the switch of being charming and needy, and then the slick financier, the operator, the duplicitous businessman with no empathy.
Right.
It's really well done.
Interesting.
Yeah. And the finale, the grand finale, Mike.
Yeah.
We both saw The Lighthouse, and again, this is one of those, unfortunately, I think it's been passed over, this film, and it's really remarkable. Robert Eggers directed it. It's very rich, and right from the opening frame, you're drawn into this very strange black and white world.
Instant transportation.
Instantly. Yeah. And the first expression that you see, beyond the sound, they build up this incredible sound tapestry that is captivating and of another world.
So basically it's set in...
like the 1890s.
On a rock.
Yeah.
In a lighthouse. And there are two characters, a third if you consider...
The bird.
The bird, seriously. Or the fantasy female.
The fantasy,
referred to her as that because she
mermaid.
is many things. But so it's set in the 1890s, right?
Yeah.
On a kind of
like
unnamed,
Nova Scotia or something like that.
Like off the main coast or somewhere, of course, remote, desolate,
terribly desolate,
unforgiving.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it features two characters. William Dafoe plays a wickie.
Yeah,
a term I was not familiar with. Yeah. Well, yeah.
People who tend the light.
Yeah. So
And it's coal-driven. I had no idea. Coal-driven lighthouse.
Yeah,
It's to
and-
shovel coal to keep the
yeah.
light
Well,
going.
and so a couple of things that were remarkable about the film, because the main
Oh, and the
takeaway is
second guy, Robert Pattinson.
Robert Pattinson. Yeah,
What a
who's
great
timberman who
job.
takes on the role of a
Yeah,
wiki apprentice.
temporarily.
Yeah, and he works under the kind of
Onerous.
yes,
Eye.
authoritarian, onerous eye of William Dafoe's
Yeah.
wiki character.
Yeah.
But what's remarkable, we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that this film is a crazy fever dream. I mean, it is in the grandest tradition of surrealist cinema, impressionist cinema, expressionist cinema. What I love about Robert Eggers is that, like with The Witch, he knows his quotations, he knows his film history, he knows his references, and it really is like you feel like you're watching it on the one hand, like you're getting a lesson in like cinematic art history, you know?
And history.
Yeah, so there's that.
That
So on
kind
the
of
one
life.
hand, it is this wild, what's going on, surrealist story, but at the same time, what really impressed me was that it takes you through the arduous nature of what it must have been like for these men to do what they did.
Very
And
grounded.
to dedicate
Yeah.
themselves. You know, a couple of things in that regard. William Dafoe's character, the wiki character, is like, back in this era, men dedicated every fiber of their being to identifying with their labor. And that it's remarkable.
And tending of the light takes on this almost like
Mystical.
yeah.
Well, it becomes
Mythical.
beyond
Yeah.
that, you know. And Robert Pattinson's character, once he arrives, and Dafoe makes him basically do all the grunt work,
Yeah,
all
he's
the
a
grunt
slave,
work.
really.
Yeah, but what you see, it's like the shoveling of the coal, the just maintenance of the house. Yeah, everything he has to go through. The film takes you through in this like almost ironically realistic way. It shows you what these men confronted and had to deal with.
hardship.
Yeah, and if there is a story to be had, it's basically two men who may or may not be gradually going insane. One of them may already be insane. For that matter, one of them may actually be a sea god. I mean, there's so much strangeness and so much subjectivity in the film. Nothing is spelled out. Nothing is made clear. But it has such a, to use your word, a kind of rich, dreamy tapestry to just get enveloped by.
Yeah. It's like Bergman-esque.
Very Bergman-esque.
Very
yeah.
Scandinavian and harrowing
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
stripped down in the beginning.
Yes, there's no dialogue first 10 or 15 minutes.
Just the sound.
And then William Dafoe has these extraordinary soliloquies in the film. You know, it's just like nail it. Whatever it is that's being nailed, he nails it.
Yeah.
It's extraordinary. But so it's very much an exercise in formalism. You have to kind of go in recognizing that, you know, you're not going to get much of a story. It's all about affect. It's all about kind of the overwhelming sensory input of the sound design that you mentioned. It's it really has a lot going for it in that regard.
And how they build this tension, this dramatic tension. There's these sounds are sinister, and there's this awful sense of doom and isolation that's built up gradually, that you know that these people have pasts and they're oddballs to begin with, but then they're thrown together and they're cut off. And so you've got this insanity that just, if it wasn't there to begin with.
It's very much like Persona, Bergman's Persona, where two characters are trapped on an island and their identities converge.
Right.
And they come to love each other, they come to hate each other. There's so much happening. And at the same time, it's being very minimal.
And I think what I loved about it, because it kept me awake, because we talked about
That's
it, kept
what you
me
loved
awake.
about it?
It kept me awake. There was this constant kind of dynamic that went back and forth between this isolation and need for being alone and quiet and
also
away,
also
and
need
this
for bonding.
desperate need for connection.
Especially
and
between,
it goes back and forth to the point they'll do almost anything to get a rise out of the other one. Mm-hmm. Anything.
To destroy each other.
Yeah. It's
and then you combine that with the constant slipping in and out of subjectivity. Like what is an hallucination? What is really happening?
Right, it all
the ins and
fuses.
the outs of it. Yeah.
And then
and I should say, because William Dafoe's character believes in the mythology of the sea. He has these
superstition.
speeches. He talks about the gulls, and he says the gulls are the returning souls of dead sailors. You know, and it's like, oh, well, yeah, sure, I'll go with that. Why not? Because there's a gull that antagonizes Robert Pattinson's character. There are very few comic relief moments, but that's one of them. But even the comedy is ominous. Even the comedy is like, God.
I mean, it reminded me, I don't want to interject, the parallel immediately for me was the albatross. I don't know if you ever read The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. Mm-hmm. I kept thinking, this is just like The Rime of the Ancient Mariner with this
Defoe's
bird.
character has a toast that he repeats.
Yeah,
like
he has
a
the
mantra.
toast.
Yeah.
And it's a coercive toast. Mm-hmm. And that's the other thing, how I think the drinking, that these pivotal moments, there's a moment at which he's almost ready to leave the island. I think it's 24 hours before his 4 weeks is up.
He's preparing to leave, yeah.
And he toasts, and he doesn't drink. Robert Pattinson, his real name's Thomas, right? Winslow Thomas. They're both called Thomas, actually, right. Truth be known, at the end. But anyway, he wants him to toast, and every time he does it, he throws out the toast, Thomas or Winslow, and fills that rancid water from the cistern. Mm-hmm. Anyway, he begins to drink, and the drink is the kind of catalyst. It's like the oil on the wick. Yeah. It starts to kind of really stir things up, and then it completely goes out of...
Yep. Until all that's left to drink is gasoline.
Yeah, and they're drinking the stuff that they're putting on the wick.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a circus of horror, but it's so believable.
And that's the thing, too.
Believable.
We could talk about this all day, as we are. And still, when you go to see it, I can't really reasonably prepare people for it.
No, don't, because
it's a film that's nearly impossible to spoil.
Well...
When are we going to start ranting? When does the rant kick in?
So, well, I hope we've given you lots of interesting little nuggets there to chew upon. And this is the end of this particular episode of Talking Pictures. So, goodbye from Mary Stack.
Goodbye from Michael Dow. And I hope we get to The Irishman next time.
Yeah.
We need to.
Yeah.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.